it really just comes down to coming in and being the same guy every day and continuing. There's going to be times when it feels like, you're the work that you're doing isn't being seen. And those are the times when you have to keep going, because that's when the work counts, is when nobody's watching. And that's when eventually the dividends will pay out later on down the road.
Welcome back, or welcome to Y Option. I am your host, Yogi Roth, as always, joined by the founder of Y Option and Best Coast Media, Jim Thornby. Jim, how are you doing today?
Doing good. We're kind of. I can't believe. We say this all the time. It's like I literally cannot believe this is week 12. Like this season has absolutely flown by like no other. I think probably because no one knew what to expect or how, like, realignment, 12-team playoff, all the little different machinations of the season that people don't know. There's no pattern to it yet. We'll be up next year. We always say, okay, this is how this all flows. But right now everyone's just diving into the deep end. So
yeah, we are in the deep end, but there's been great progress. I want to start with that. Look, today's show, it's a real fun one. We have the leading tackler in the Big Ten, Carson Schwesinger from UCLA on. This story is phenomenal. From walk-on at Oaks Christian to starting linebacker for UCLA, team captain, leading his team in tackles. All he does is have double-digit tackle games. He's going to talk about his journey, the team's journey, and of course the game they have Friday night at Washington with a bowl berth at stake. Both teams desperately need a win in some fashion. We talk about the CFP rankings. Of course, the Oregon Ducks remain at number one. But Jim, number one, I want to start by giving a ton of love to our community, because this show has continued to grow. Our newsletter at yoption.com has continued to grow. The people engaging has continued to grow. So without you, that doesn't happen. As always, from the beginning when we started this thing, we wanted to be about college football through the lens of the West Coast. So telling you stories that you may not know, like Carson Schwesinger, but also giving you thoughts about Nebraska and Matt Rule from the lens of the West Coast as USC hosts Nebraska on Saturday at the Coliseum, and so on and so forth. Jim, I think we have done that, but we would have no chance of doing that if we didn't have this incredible community. So thank you for those of you that are paid subscribers. It's awesome. Hopefully you're enjoying some of the content behind the paywall. Can't wait for the CFP. We got some great things planned for all of you. For those of you that are just subscribing, all good too. Hopefully you are enjoying the free content we're giving you. That's not going to stop either. But this thing, we're just going to continue to grow it. We love the last couple of weeks. But Jim and I are also going to love December, when we can kind of reset a little bit and start bringing some unique content to all of you. So with that said, Jim, Tuesday night, CFP rankings. I was at my final flag football practice. The parents went against the kids, and the kids won 13-12. You were glued. You were locked into the CFP. I caught up afterwards. What are your big takeaways from the second ranking of the college football playoff?
Well, I think it's not so much where we are, but where we're going, I think, is what I look at when I see these. Right now with the Big Ten, you got 4 teams in the top 5. With the SEC, you have 5 teams in the top 11, 9 in the top 25 overall. I mean, I think with those two things, we're barring some weirdness happening here or there, we're looking at each of those conferences getting 4 teams in. I think
right now, you believe totality. You're like, it's happening.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, I think the one thing, like if Ohio State blows the doors off Indiana, I think that calculus would change a little bit.
Okay.
But I think as long as Indiana, keeps it respectable with Ohio State, who knows? I mean, Indiana could win the game. I'm not like discounting that. I'm thinking like quote unquote worst case scenario for them. I think as long as they stay in that ball game and they finish as an 11-1 team, they're gonna find their way in. The SEC, I think, same thing. There's 4. I'm sure there's going to be a push for 5. We've seen this we've seen this every year. Like we would joke when it was a 4-team, and people were like, there should be 3 SEC teams in the 4-team playoff. But this is not that year. There's not the SEC team that is head and shoulders above all the other SEC teams. There's a lot of really good SEC teams, and they beat each other on a weekly basis. So it kind of brings, we saw this in the Pac-12, for years, where like we would have those few good teams, and then they would all beat up each other, and everybody go, oh, that league's no good. And it's like, no, the league, you're seeing the kind of the formula here with the Big Ten is that you want to have like a few really elite teams, and then everybody else be kind of mediocre, so that everyone just beats up on the mediocre teams, because that's the way to really build up how that goes. But it'll be interesting. I think, at this point, there are some exceptions. And I know we had Andy Staples on earlier this week, and he talked about, the Big 12 and the ACC being one bid leagues. That is, I think, a likely scenario. It's not set in stone, because obviously there's still, a few weeks of games to be played here. But I think if that's going to be kind of hard for them to get in a second team. I think basically the only way that happens is for the Big 12, is if BYU kind of wins out the rest of the regular season, and then a Colorado or a Kansas State or whoever it is that they would play wins the conference championship game, and then they have to go. And I think BYU would probably have enough of a resume to still make it at that point. It's kind of Miami losing kind of cost the ACC to be able to do that same thing. So it's going to be interesting on that path.
It's going to be, to me, like, okay, and again, we're about being thoughtful, right? So as you're talking, I'm thinking like, let's just pretend it's a year ago, right? And you have Texas winning the Big 12, and then maybe it's a BYU and they're fighting for 2 teams in, right? You have Oregon, of course, dominating the Pac-12, and maybe it's the Cougs, maybe it's Colorado, maybe it's Arizona State. Like, are you fighting for that second team in? Right? That doesn't exist. But in the ACC, I think about like, what is Dabo gonna say at his pre-championship game press conference if they're in that ACC title game? What is Coach Mario Cristobal going to say? Like, they're going to be positioning their league, rightfully so, from their lens. Like, no, why is the Big Ten going to have 4 teams in or 5 teams in? Why is the SEC like that's all going to happen? And I think all of the arguments are fair. And I just look at this thing and I'm like, okay, 4 teams in from respective leagues. I think for the Big Ten, it's very fair right now. I think Indiana's in, unless they lose 55 to zip. But even with that, should they be a 10-11 seed going 11-1 in the season? Like, how hard it is? I always would go back to that as an analyst of like, I was on teams that went 12-0. I coached on teams that went 11-1. Like, it is so damn hard to get a team to go do that. And with an expanded playoff, we're going to allow a 2-loss team instead of a 1-loss team in. Like, it's just a different, to me, level of performance anxiety, of preparation, of performance in games. Like, to be 10-0 now for Indiana, how much harder that is than being Georgia because they lost an early game, or being Alabama because they lost an early game. Like, it's a totally different psyche and navigation as the CEO or the head coach of the team. So I just wonder what that's like. Even Mario Cristobal's team, like, to get his team to keep coming back. Like, you look at all the close games that UW had last year. Like, there's a version of that comparison to Miami. So I think it's just, to be fair, like, I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of a year ago, be fighting tooth and nail for the second team in the Pac-12. And I don't want to light up a conference for fighting tooth and nail for a second team, because I think it's fair. Like, I do think it's fair in that regard. And I also think it's fair to be Washington State and being like, hey, what about us? Like, I talked to some high-ranking people in college football this week because I don't have a game. So I got a little more bandwidth, right? I'm doing studio on Saturday night in the Big Ten Network studios with Ashley Adamson, our colleague and our first guest here at Y Option. And there's some people that just assume, like, the Cougs are going to go in if they're 11-1. Why wouldn't they get in? Right. And so you just have to, I think, be really thoughtful of the different narratives and the positioning. And then now it comes down to, like, what is the committee saying? So I don't know where it'll net out, but you better believe that everybody from Colorado to Pullman to Miami, all the schools that might be that the outside looking in, right? Those 4 out, they are building their argument for why we are better than. And I love that. Like, I think it's fair, and I think that's why we'll see the playoff in 2 years go to 14. And maybe we'll end up getting where the late, great Mike Leach said, just get it to 16 and call it a day. Maybe we will, maybe we won't, but we're here for all of it. So that's kind of my thoughts. So what else you got?
Well, it's funny, like, to that point, like, like my guy Chuck Dunlop at the SEC, who had, who has the same job that I had at the Pac-12 the last few years, or at least similarly so. I'm sure he's on the table. We need 6 teams. And I respect that. Like, of course, you got to fight for your schools. Like, we fought tooth and nail to get everything that we could for our schools. Like, we're making comparisons last year between Arizona and Iowa just because we thought Arizona should be in the top 15. We're not even talking about they should be in the top 4 playoff. We're doing statistical breakdowns about why Arizona is a better team than Iowa to be 15th. I mean, it gets down, when you're at that conference level, you're getting into that nitty gritty of each one of these schools, because each one of them, you're trying to get just one more, And to that, on that level, let's talk about the Pac-12 school of Washington State. So
what do you got?
On Monday, when, I was thinking about the weekend and I was thinking about Washington State's resume, and I was like, man, they did everything they could do last week. They won their game convincingly. Both sides of the ball played well. And it was like, but the people on the other side of their resume, the teams that were going to build them up, the Texas Techs, the Washingtons, even Boise State, didn't really help them out. But then the rankings came out on Tuesday night, and I started looking at it, and I'm like, now, again, not saying this is likely in any stretch of any stretch. Obviously, Washington State has to win every single game and has to look good doing it. I mean, style points are going to matter for Wazoo the rest of the way. They can't have any nail biters where people go, because, I mean, let's face it, the teams that they're playing the rest of the way, they're not going to get a lot of credit for beating them. It's expected for them to beat them. However, if you look at the teams ahead of them, so they need BYU and Miami to both just win out. Like, make that no-brainer. That's the BYU is the one team from the Big 12. Miami is the one team from the ACC. So that that would give them one berth each. You need Tennessee to beat Georgia, and it wouldn't hurt for that to be a convincing victory to kind of knock Georgia out of the conversation, which will be the first thing to speed up that expanded playoff when Georgia is not in the playoffs.
Here for it.
Yeah. You need Texas to beat A&M. Because, again, that's kind of the same situation. Tennessee and Texas are kind of over here. Georgia and A&M are over here. You need them to slide it. You need Texas and Tennessee to slide into the absolutes, and Georgia and A&M to slide out of the consideration. I talked about BYU. I think you need Arizona State to beat Kansas State. So that way that BYU championship win is over Colorado. So that, in sense, is taking out all those other teams where it's just BYU consider. And then you need Notre Dame to lose one game. So that, because that's going to be the team, with them not being in a conference, they're only in they're only an at-large consideration, just like Washington State. Probably wouldn't hurt for that to be in the last week of the season against USC. I think that might be, so there's not any time for Notre Dame to recover from that and be like, oh no, but this is actually what our last thing is. And if all of those things happen, none of which are a huge stretch. BYU and Miami winning out, not a huge stretch. Tennessee beating Georgia, not a huge stretch. Texas beating A&M, not a huge stretch. Arizona State beating Kansas State, not a huge stretch. Notre Dame losing a game, probably the stretchiest of all those things. But as we saw with Utah a couple years ago to get to the Pac-12 championship game, where it was just like, there was no chance of them getting in. But, no, actually, if X, Y, and Z all happen, then it's like, well, those are actually all kind of possible things. So, again, I'm not saying that Washington State is going to get in the playoff. I don't want to get Cougs fans' hopes all, raised and then have them be crushed. However, I'm thinking that there is more of a path than I originally had thought going into this week once I actually looked at the most recent rankings.
Okay, I love this. I want to spend some time on this today. So Cougs, we're coming for you here. Okay. Would you rather, Jim Thornby, right? Put yourself as a Coug fan or remember that program. Would you rather be 13, right? And or be like one of the 4 out, or be at like 18? Like when it's all said and done, right? Because I look at all this and I'm like, okay, if all those things happen, here's going to be the debate. It's going to be, well, Notre Dame beat A&M, but Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois. But A&M beat who they just beat at home. They just beat Blue Bloody. Who they just beat?
I'm completely spaced on it, but yeah, they had a really good win. You're 100% right.
Right, like you start playing that game.
I got to turn my SEC brain back on.
Right, and then you're like, well, SC beat Notre Dame, and SC lost to Washington, and Washington State beat Washington. Like you start playing all that game, and to me, like I'm gonna be I'm trying to think of the best word here. I'm gonna be very frustrated if I'm a Coug fan and I'm sitting at 13, because in the Pac-12, like again, if we go to where this thing started, if they're the number 2 team in the Pac-12 and just lose to Oregon, even if they lost to them twice, right? Is their argument stronger? Is their argument on par with a Notre Dame team that has 2 losses, with an A&M team that has 3 losses, with a Georgia team that has 3 losses? Like, is that the conversation? And if so, why are they getting punished? Why are they getting punished for nothing that they did? All they did is play the schedule that by the grace of the scheduling gods, and is it Mr. Brown, like pieced together, like the scheduling guru, right? He pieced together so they could have a schedule. They didn't lose the majority of their key contributors. I get they lost Cam Ward, but John Mateer played last year. John Mateer, we believe, at least, is a Heisman candidate right now. A fair conversation, is one of the top 10 players in America where we sit today on November 13th.
Ready, set, dream cabin nestled in the woods. Just 4 hours to go. New job halfway across the country. Butterflies before a first date. Wherever you go, 76 fuels all the ways you go, go, go.
So I just say that of like, if the committee, if you put yourself in that light, is Washington State given different credence? And I get that you might say, well, what would they have done against Arizona State? Well, go to the Texas Tech game. What would they have done against Colorado? Well, I don't know. You could debate that. Like, and that's to me the healthy, right? There you go. So yeah. I don't know, man. Like, I think that like the margins are so small there for the Cougs that if things happen well for them to get left out, if all of those things happen, where like if those things happen, it's pretty clear, at least from a W and an L standpoint. You're 11-1. You've done everything you could possibly do. Now you get into the context of the Boise State loss. Put any of those teams ranked in the top 12 at Boise State. For real. Put them there. I'd be really curious what might happen if Texas goes to the blue turf. I'd be really curious. Go to some of these teams, especially teams that have struggled defensively. What might happen if they go to the blue turf against the best running back in America? I think they'd struggle. Like, I think it'd be a game. Like, I don't think Boise's not relevant. So that's thought 1. Thought 2, here's my next question for you, Jim, is do you want Boise State to lose and Army to come in as undefeated? Do you want both of those teams to lose? Because if you played this thing out, and I get that Boise and Wazoo are in the same league in 2 years, or a year and a half, or whatever you want to call it. But like if all of a sudden there is no like quote unquote group of 5 undefeated conference champion, is that a good thing for an 11-1 team that's going to be the best non-Power 4 conference in a year and a half in college football?
I think my whole thing is just because of where we're at with Washington State right now in the global scheme of things in college football. I would want to be part of the conversation. So like just to say, X, Y, Z all happened, and you know what? We're still here. We're still part of, as heartbreaking as it would be to have them pick Georgia, a 3-loss Georgia team over you.
Which would be BS, in my humble opinion.
But
I would blow a gasket. Just so you know.
But like, we can't pretend like we wouldn't see that one coming.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Not to say
and they would be favored in the game. Georgia would be, and they have a way better roster. Like,
and that would be, and that would be the conversation. People would be like, "Well, of course Georgia's better."
Right.
And it's like, well,
what the hell's the point of playing the game?
Exactly. But I would rather that be the case and that be the conversation that we're having. That, like, what are we doing? What are we doing here if these games don't matter?
Yeah.
Like, we've beaten all these teams and we've put ourselves in this position. And even if it means getting it ripped away, I'd rather be in that fight. I mean, that's the whole thing, right? The whole welcome to the fight. Like, they're going to be fighting all year, no matter what the situation is. So,
yeah, I love it. What's the Ryan Leaf line? It's easy to be a duck or a Trojan. It's not easy to be a cougar.
It's not easy to be a cougar. Yeah.
I'd say that it's easier to be a dog than it is to be a cougar if that comes up. So we'll save the emotional outburst for a couple weeks. Meditate, Yogi, meditate. Okay. Here's my other thing for Washington State, and I know you're on it, Washington State, because you have a coach that has been so loyal to you and Jake Dickert. Like, make no mistake about it. Like, Jake Dickert is a hot commodity in college football. Let's just be real. What he has navigated that team through, you've seen it. They've had him mic'd up. They showcase a bunch of content on their own social platforms. Their head of video, Carson, you're crushing it, man. Keep it rolling. I'll say this. If I'm the Cougs, I'm not going to say the phrase that I dislike. The phrase is like, back up the Brinks truck. Like, that's not reality. I am just making sure that I am backing up the resources truck and saying, hey, Jake Dickert, look at the landscape of college football. I get if, like, Wisconsin opens up. Of course they should call him. Of course they should. And you know what? And he should take every call. He should. But if I'm Washington State, lock this dude down. Right? And locking him down at a non-blue bloody type of program, I know is like not necessarily the most accurate thing, because I don't think you can ever lock a guy like that down. But for someone who loves the community in Pullman and Jake Dickert and his wife and their kids, for somebody who has loved being in the fight there, somebody who loves being 10 minutes from the facility, loves small town America, and loves how this team has progressed, and now presumptuously, loves the new league and the landscape of being the power within that league, right? If they went to the Big 12 for no money, which I would imagine they would have done, they wouldn't be the power in that league. They'd be like Texas Tech. They'd be a fun team, and they'd scare people, and they'd win a bunch of games, but they wouldn't be the power in that. They're the heavy. They are the heavy. They will be the preseason favorite if Jake Dicker's still the head coach next year, or in 2 years when that new league emerges. To that point, staff, resources, recruiting, planes, whatever it is, all the tangible things you can offer that maybe aren't an $8 million a year salary, like, do it. You've got a guy that will be the face of this place, like some of the past greats, like a Mike Price, like a Mike Leach. He is already that, to your point, Jim, of like navigating through what we've all referenced, the fight. I called them America's team on Cowherd Show in the offseason or the preseason. They've become that. Whatever it takes. Don't let it get too far. We saw what happened at Jim's alma mater in Arizona. To me, they locked Jed Fish up in November to a long-term deal and pay him $6-7 million a year. He might still be there, you know? So that's it. And I know there's a lot to that. And I know that Jake Dicker's probably saying, not right now. We got to focus. But so I have no knowledge.
It's also what you have agents for.
So I have
no
knowledge.
Have to have those conversations.
Yeah, and I would imagine the conversations are happening. So let's just hope they are. And that's just my note. So to that, let's get to the Big Ten. Like, look, the contenders should roll this week. It's not easy going to Wisconsin. Ask Alabama. It wasn't for a 2-minute drive before the half. It might have been a different game. Ask a bunch of teams. Look at Penn State. That was a tight game. Oregon will be ready for this. I love Oregon's schedule, Jim, because every 2 weeks they got one that you got to be dialed for. And I think more importantly, you're watching this team with a tremendous focus, play with joy. I call it exhale games, when big time teams with big time expectations are like, whew, we got through that. That is not the way to a championship. I don't see that from this team. I see that with some other big time teams. I've seen that with big time teams in the past. This team is going for it every week. Keep the pedal on the gas. go for it. I think they will in Madison. But there are two really intriguing games in the Big Ten I'd like us to break down. We got a Friday night game with our guest, Carson Schwesinger, the star linebacker for UCLA. How he wasn't on the lot semifinalist, I do not know, but he's a Butkus semifinalist. He's up for the Burlsworth Trophy, which is the best walk-on who entered college as a walk-on and has become a star. Baker Mayfield notably basically won that every year when he was in college. This young man has a great opportunity to do that as well. They got a Friday night game, and then the Trojans, amid a lot of changes and some scrutiny and some news, host another team amid a lot of changes and some scrutiny and maybe some news in Nebraska. So where do you go on the two games of the LA schools in the Big Ten?
Well, let's start with the Friday night game because that'll, chronologically speaking, make sense. I think when I looked at this game 2 weeks ago, it's like, oh yeah, UW, just keeps rolling as they try and get into bowl eligibility. They're 5-0 at home, and so they are a solid team. But you've seen the Bruins just chip away. And that win last Friday, two Friday nights in a row now for the Bruins against Iowa, was a convincing win over a good team. And, again, we had Andy Staples on the other day and, talked about, if not for those two Ethan Garber's picks on the first two possessions, I mean, this is a dominant win by UCLA. And then I kind of was like, how do you kind of compare the two teams and stuff like that? One thing I liked, obviously both of these teams, first year of the Big Ten, let's look at their common opponents. They have 4 common opponents this year, all quote unquote legacy Big Ten teams so far. Obviously they're going to have, by the end of the year, they'll all both play at SC and Oregon as well. But Penn State, Iowa, Indiana, Rutgers. UW played all 4 of those schools on the road, 0-4 against those 4 teams. UCLA, who split those 2 games, not only split the wins and losses, so they're 2-2 in those 4 games, but also 2 of them at home and 2 of them on the road. So, and I kind of look at the scores. I mean, both of them got it kind of handed to them by Indiana, which has been the story of the season this year. They both, to some extent, had it handed to them by Penn State. UCLA, not as much, but UCLA also didn't do a whole lot in that game. But you look at, I think the one really telling one to me is Iowa. I mean, now granted, one was in Iowa and one was in LA, but UW got pretty handled in that game, whereas UCLA handled the Hawkeyes. So I'm starting to lean a lot more towards UCLA. Now, again, it's going to be in Seattle, so that kind of throws a lot of this out the window. But I'm much more on the Bruins in this game than I would have been 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, 42 degrees, no rain. Rain in the morning, so it's not going to look like it did in the SC game 2 weeks ago. I'm leaning UCLA too. I'm saying I'm choosing UCLA to win this game, and here's why. I love what Jed Fisher, Brendan Carroll, and Jimmy Doherty and company do on offense, and I'm a fan of Steve Belichick and the scheme that he has defensively. The challenge is in the trenches, man. I mean, and for UCLA, they haven't been great on the offensive line by any stretch, and who knows how healthy they'll be in this game. But offensively, they get the ball out creatively, kind of like Washington tries to as well, right? Get the backs out, but they just ran the ball really well against an Iowa defensive front that I think is better than what Washington's defensive front is. So you got to think they should move the ball. They moved the ball on everybody. They moved the ball on Penn State, moved the ball on LSU. They didn't move the ball against Oregon, right? Oregon's number 1 team in America. We'll give them that. But overall, they've moved the ball, and I think they're getting better offensively. The reason I go UCLA in this one on the road is defensively, man. Washington has struggled on the O-line big time this year, especially in the most recent game. UCLA has kind of rolled offensive fronts to a large degree. I mean, it hasn't been in totality of games. You look what they did against Nebraska, Minnesota, Rutgers, and then this most recent game against Iowa. It's been a party in the backfield. right? Or it's been Jay Toia, who's the most underrated player because his numbers aren't great, but he's taking up double teams. He's allowing Carson Schwesinger to lead the Big Ten in tackles, who will be our guest here shortly. I just think the defense is going to be too good. It's too fast. It's too athletic. And think about that statement. Because the first month it was, and even DeShaun Foster said it, like, hey, we lost a first-round pick. It's really hard to replace the Murphy twins. And look at what they have done. They make an adjustment. Femi Oladejo goes to play defensive end. You look at them playing a lot of base defense with Ali Cajo at linebacker, Kane Madrano at linebacker, and, of course, Carson Schwesinger at linebacker. Like, they've made necessary adjustments. I just think they're the better team in this one. This will come down to, do they turn it over? And what are the penalties like? Two teams that have hurt themselves all year long in their first year with two new head coaches. And then I think the unique twist to this, and that's why I like this matchup, is one, it's an old Pac-12 game. But two, DeShaun worked with Jed. They had a year together under Jim Moore. So I think it's kind of cool. So tremendous regard for one another in this game. And it's always fun to kind of go back to the roots, per se. Yeah. So I'll be looking forward. Friday night, I'll be glued in a hotel in downtown Chicago all game for this one.
Yeah, and the other game, with Nebraska and SC, obviously the big story in this game is about SC's quarterback, with Jade Maeva taking over for Miller Moss, and see how that goes. But to me, the thing that I'm most intriguing about is the energy around Nebraska now. I mean, this is a team that has not been to a bowl game since 2016. And then you look at, let's just look at the last three seasons. Or last 4 seasons. 2021 started 3-3, and you're like, oh, here we go. Went 0-6 the last 6 games. 2022 again started 3-3. Okay, maybe we're 1-5 the last 6 games. Last year they started 5-3, lose the final 4 games, and now they've lost 3 straight. They have 3 straight losses, and they just need that one win to be bowl eligible. I mean, when they win, if they win this game or, another game to actually get, they're going to go bonkers because, all that just pent up anxiety of, and just how do you deal with that? How do you manage that to know, every year we get so close to finally just achieving that first goal? Because obviously Matt Rule didn't come to Nebraska to make bowl games, as he talked about, and there was a lot made of it in the preseason, when he talked about the Big Ten's going to get 4 teams, and people are like, oh, well, you're not one of them. It's like, he's not really talking about himself. He's just talking about the strength of the league, and people got all bent out of shape. But that's not his goal. Is to be one of those teams that are in that conversation. And when you have, how do you get over that anxiety level of being so close and having it ripped away, and each year just right on the precipice and then ripped away? That's going to be the thing that's going to be compelling to me to watch.
Oh, what would be so compelling to call this game? I cannot wait to watch this game. We talked about it we went on the show Kings of the North this week, which is just a really fun show. So check that out, talking all things college football. They really take care of the northern part of the country. I think they represent 28 teams, just dialed, especially in the Big Ten. We talked a little bit about Nebraska, and I'll say a similar thing here, Jim, is that in this game, everything you referenced, if you subbed USC for Nebraska in your comment, you'd have the same thing. You have 2 teams with performance anxiety. You have 2 teams that have huge standards. You have 2 teams with dramatic goals. You have 2 teams with maniacal fan bases. And you got 2 teams that need a win. For USC, if you would have told me, we said from the jump, foundational year, had them at about 8 wins. I did not have them not go to a bowl game. Did not. Same thing for Nebraska. They drill Colorado in week 2 of the season, I believe, because we were there the week after that. And you're thinking, SC, 2 playoff teams coming in the Big Ten right here, man. Look out. Got a fresh quarterback, got Matt Rule, blah, blah, blah. And now look what these teams have done. So I believe that they're in the world of hoping versus knowing. Pete Carroll used to teach us that all the time. Hoping things go well. That's where these 2 sidelines are. If I'm working the sideline for CBS, I'm trying to figure out the psyche of this team, not early on, not after a score, but when the other team puts a 10-play drive together, when you're, it's a lull in the third quarter. What is that like? You're like, God, I hope Jade Maeva makes a play. I hope to just kind of throw it up to Zachariah Branch and he does something. I hope that Ja'Cory Barney, the other freshman receiver for Nebraska, who's just an absolute stud, I hope he makes a play? Or do we know that we could put a drive together? And now you got Dana Holgorsen calling plays in a totally different scheme. But what can you really do? Matt Rule referenced that this week. Can't do a ton, but it's going to be it's going to be easier throws. The ball is going to get out. Okay, against a very aggressive defense coordinated by Danton Lynn, who, oh, by the way, was at UCLA last year, who, oh, by the way, is coordinated by Kaika Malloy, who, oh, by the way, just went to Lincoln and beat this very quarterback, this very offensive line with a bunch of really unique blitzes and pass rushing lanes. You know that they talk. I would imagine they talk pretty regularly. So I'm going to give the advantage to SC. I'm so intrigued to see what happens at quarterback, because I think the Miller Moss thing is very emotional. He's a captain. He's a leader. He's all those things. But I also know teams want to win. And we're talking about a quarterback who sits around 6'4", 6'5", 230 in Mayava. Quarterback run game is going to be a thing. It's just going to be a thing. So what does that look like? And then for Lincoln Riley, as you peel it back in the fourth quarter, I think it's CBS, Gary Danielson and company, they're going to be talking about, like, what is the quarterback room going to look like at SC? Right? If you presume that Miller Moss isn't in it next year, then you presume Jaden Mayava is the guy, but that is going to be part of the evaluation right now. And I think, sadly, where we are in the game, coaches have to figure that part out. So I'm really curious to see what happens. I think my only thought on the quarterback thing is what we referenced earlier, is if you're so convicted as a coach, I love the decision. And I know Lincoln Riley well enough to know that he was convicted this was the right thing for his program. Tough decision, challenging one. And then we'll see on the other side who even plays quarterback for Nebraska. I don't know. We sit here on Wednesday. I don't know. Heinrich Harburg. Is it going to be Danny Kaelin? Is it going to be Dylan Raiola? I know Dylan's as tough as they come. I'd assume it's going to be him, but we don't know yet. So a lot of things to play out in that one. All right, let's rip through the Big 12 and the rest of college football, because I do want to get to our interview really quickly, Jim. For you, Utah, the drama, the fine. I thought that I saw something that's pretty thoughtful, and I think this is accurate around PIs, Jim, of like every game it's a judgment call, right? So every game, pass interferences in games have, a theme, right? They're going to be aggressive, or they're going to let you play. Just be very simple about it. I thought this one at the end was inconsistent with elements throughout the ball game. Did he grab him? Yeah. By the rule, by the record, is it a penalty? Yeah. Was it a very physical game? Yeah. Like, that to me is where I net out of, like, come on, right? Even the timeout, like, I have to see all the camera angles to piece it together before that other fourth down. But Utah had every shot. Be frustrated, be upset, all the things. I'm here for all of that. But you also had every shot to win the game. Now you have to regroup. You talked about the psyche. Brandon Rose, right? He's out. Who latest on the starting quarterback? And what are your thoughts on that in this game? And what are your thoughts on the Big 12?
Yeah, it should be. Looks like it's going to be Isaac Wilson back in the starting job for there. And it's funny, just real fast on the penalty thing, because the beauty of Twitter, sometimes it's the worst app in the world, and it's the best app in the world. Depending on if you find the right thing. Like Terry McAuley was responded. The NBC. Coordinator official. Yeah.
Oh my
so
God.
He responded. He wound up responding to someone, and someone was basically like called him out. It was just like, talking about, and he was like, Macaulay went back and looked at like every contested, or every passing play or whatever like that, and there was, to the point of like, oh, they didn't call it like this, whatever. And he's like, well, no, I went back and I watched every snap that was like this, and someone was like, no, there's no way you did that, and Terry McAulay was like, I have access to every angle, and
that's awesome. What did he say?
It was the greatest, and people just started like dunking on the other guy. I was like, you had no idea who you were responding to. So
did he say it was consistent?
He said he had no problem. He thought it was a penalty, and that there was nothing on the way that the game was played on those passing plays that would make you think that it was whatever. Now, to that point, I've seen so many different opinions on that all week about like, was it, wasn't it? At the end of the game, Utah didn't score in the second half, and that's going to be the difference. And the thing now, when they're going into Colorado, with the really thing that I was looking at is Colorado's defense. You look at the last 3 years. I mean, that 2021 team with Carl Durrell. Excuse me. Yeah, 2022 team. I have my years off here for a second. That defense, I mean, that whole team was one of the worst teams in college football in the last 30 years. I mean, they were bottom 5 in like every statistical category, offense and defense. They gave up 44.5 points per game that year. Last year, they got that down to 34.8. This year, 22.6. You look at yards per game allowed, which is not always the greatest stat, but like you can at least use it as some sort of context. 2022, 509.8 yards per game allowed. Last year, 453.3. So that went down over 50 yards per game. This year, 367.2 yards per game. Now, granted, they're not going against Caleb Williams. They're not going against Michael Penix. They're not going against Bo Nix. I mean, let's be honest. This year's Big 12 is not as good as the Pac-12 the last 2 years. I mean, that might be quote unquote controversial, but it's, whatever. But kudos to Colorado for getting that defense to be at a level similar to what they have with Shedeur and Travis, because that's the reason, that's the difference between, Shedeur and Travis are not really better than they were last year. They were amazing last year. Shedeur just was on his back the whole year because he was getting sacked all the time. This year, they're especially more so of late. I think this Texas Tech game, they had a few more sacks, but the offense is still good, but the defense is really good at making them a competitive team. And then the only other thing on the Big 12 I wanted to say was like Kansas going to BYU, and you had Kansas last week. That's going to be interesting because all 6 of Kansas's losses this year are to teams with winning records. 5 of the 6 are to teams with 6 or more wins. So they've lost to all good teams. They're 0-5 in games decided by 6 points or less. BYU 4-0 in games decided by 6 points or less. The odds makes you think that if these two teams get in this situation again, I think Kansas has a real good shot at this game.
Yeah, I'll say this. Utah, they're going to give Colorado Utah's best effort. Defensively, they got to find a way to get pressure on Shedeur Sanders. They have to minimize explosive plays, capable of doing that. I'm curious about the psyche of the quarterback room and Isaac Wilson. He just got benched, right? And now he's the guy. And you're young. And you lost your offensive coordinator, quarterback coach you've been with all year. Okay, you're good there. Like that to me is going to be the navigation. And that is not an easy thing to do, especially on the road when you're trying to, like Isaac Wilson can't try to win the job back and be the guy moving forward with every throw. He's just got to just run the offense, right? And that to me has always been a challenge. Arizona State, I think they have a chance to go win at K-State. Run game travels. Cam Scadaboo,
he's on pace to play this week now. So
on pace to play. Check him out on social media. I think Y Option retweeted it where he's like trying to convince Kenny Dillingham to play last week. I think he's a Heisman candidate. I really do. For me, he's in my top 10 right now. I think it's fair. I know that when you miss a game, it hurts you. Didn't hurt Travis. Not going to hurt Travis Hunter, right? So I don't think it should. I'm trying to be consistent in that regard. KU at BYU. I'm going to pick Kansas in the game. Why? 30 seniors on this team. Quarterback is real. Run game is real. And I know BYU, like that was an emotional win. I think there's something to like a hangover of that. I think this team also knows what's at stake. They'll be at their best with Kalani Sitake. This is a never say die team. Like they know things will go well for them. I just think this Kansas, watching them on offense, calling that game, I was just like, damn, like when you got a running quarterback, man, it just changes things. Kalani Sitake and that defensive staff will be dialed. But I'm going upset city. It's a classic late season upset game. Iowa State, Cincinnati. I'd love to see Iowa State, Mike Campbell come on back. But the game I'm going to be keyed in most to, honestly, is another win on Friday. I'm going to be that guy in my hotel with multiple screens up. I know you will be too, because Houston at Arizona. Find me a team. And you could argue, like SC might win this battle or Nebraska, but I think Arizona they need a win more than anybody in America. At least on the West Coast, in my humble opinion, Jim. So can they get it? Home game against Houston. What will that crowd be like? How do they navigate that? What's early success look like? This is a big moment for this team with where their record is and where they sit this season. You gonna be okay?
It's tough too because obviously Tucson is a basketball town, and there's an Arizona basketball game that night as well. So
at the same time.
I forget the exact the start time and the kickoff, but like it's not doing them any favors. Like I've seen plenty of fans be like, "Oh no, I'm watching basketball."
Come on,
So
man. Come on, guys. Come on, guys. We gotta
rally up.
Yeah, we need Arizona to play Kansas 2 times in basketball, and we need never to have a home game in 2 sports at the same time in the crossover season. That needs to change. Okay, with that said, what will change is the next person you see on this screen. It will no longer just be Jim and I. We are going to welcome in our guest today, and as usual, every one of our guests are presented by our founding partner, 76. Today, it's Carson Schwesinger. And 76, their mantra is keeping you in the know on the go, go, go. This guy's path is phenomenal. It's inspiring. It's real. It's raw. Let's hope it doesn't become archaic in terms of a walk-on, earning his stripes, earning his spot, earning a scholarship, and now earning the right to be called the best linebacker in the Big Ten. I think it's very fair. Do not just categorize Carson Schwesinger as a walk-on every time you call game. This is a former walk-on who bet on himself and now is leading the Big Ten in tackles. Come on, man. Let's give him his flowers, his due to all the award committees out there. This guy, if he's not on your list, put him on it. He's going to be a first-team All-Big Ten player, in my opinion. He's got a chance to be a first-team All-American. He's played like that. Watch him in every single game. And if you don't, at least listen or watch this interview. So here comes our guest today, UCLA captain, star inside linebacker, Carson Schwesinger. As reference, this is that man leading the Big Ten in tackles, Carson Schwesinger. I got to ask the obvious, man, like, do you wake up and is that your hair out of bed? Like, do you style that thing? We love good hair here on Y Option.
Yeah. I don't do too much to it, I guess. This is just, I guess, post shower after practice, so not too much to it. No.
That's awesome. So I've called a couple of your games this year, and before the first one, I was talking to your head coach, DeShaun Foster. I said, tell me about this linebacker, man. He's all over the field. And he goes, man, he just kind of like flips that hair back, puts his helmet on, just makes plays. And then I talked to a good friend, Eric Tannenbaum, who you know his son, Cole, he's a quarterback, at Arizona. And he started telling me about you as like a young athlete. And that's where I want to begin today's conversation. Like, what was the young you like when you reflect back on how you were a competitor and then eventually became into the competitor and the elite performer you are today?
Yeah, I think if we're going all the way back to young, I started playing, sports when I could start walking. I don't know. That's just my whole family was playing sports. My older brother, my older sister, my younger sister actually saw me and my older brother playing football and decided she wanted to play as well. So she grew up playing tackle football with all the guys. So that was kind of just my whole family. And then I think growing up too, I was just always competitive. Never wanted to lose. I know with youth ball, at least with my dad, we only ended up losing 1 game. He was the coach. We only lost 1 game in 5 years. So started with that, and then just same thing getting into high school. I don't know. It's just that competitive edge. It's a fun sport to play, regardless of what I was playing in high school. I played a little basketball or things like that, but just wanting to go out and compete is something that I think has always been a part of just who I am since a young age.
All right. So what were backyard football games like in your house? And like, were you allowed to tackle your sister?
Oh man, she always got the benefit of the doubt from my dad, but when she'd go on the field and we'd be watching, she'd just be putting everybody in their place, scoring touchdowns. She wasn't just sitting on the sideline. She was in there, defensive end, running back, scoring touchdowns, things like that. But growing up, it was always me and my older brother going at it. Eventually they'd all get to a point where we were getting too rough and one of us would get in trouble. Most of the time it'd be me because I'd be losing. He had the size advantage and stuff. But, always competing with my brother in the backyard. We were making up games. Our parents would say we couldn't do one. We'd try and make one up that would, bend the rules just enough so we could still be throwing each other on the ground and things like that.
Oh, I love that. I have so many questions about that. I have 2 boys and I'm the youth coach, but we'll save that for another time because you got a way more important story than that. I'm also a walk-on who earned a scholarship. Love the story of that. But I think there's always a moment where we tell ourselves, hey, I can go play at that level. Did you have one? And if so, what was it like?
Yeah, I think there maybe have been a couple. So I know when I first showed up, I felt maybe a little out of place, a little imposter syndrome, didn't know if I belonged. And then it was really the first fall camp when, you're getting to watch everybody play and stuff. And I guess there's at least a little bit of level of confidence where I'm like, okay, you know what? I can play with these people. Maybe I'm on the younger side now, on the smaller side, but this is a level of football I can play. And then I think the real moment that I gained a lot of confidence was somewhere in that first year I started playing some special teams on the field, and it was the same thing, just realizing sometimes you hype it up a little too much in your head and stuff, and you're realizing on the field, I'm like, okay, you know what, I can hang with these guys, and this is something that I'm able to do.
I think sometimes as a walk-on, and even as a scholarship player, but like that first training camp, you reference sometimes it could be a challenge. I can remember like looking up at like the ceiling in the dorm in training camp and being like, God, is this place like really for me? Like, can I do this?
Mm-hmm.
And you had to have like, to me, like there was nowhere to hide. Like I had to face it. I can remember it so vividly. It was Sutherland Hall, 7th floor in Pittsburgh, PA for the Pitt Panthers. Did you have that? And then did you have a moment where you were like, okay, I'm going to be in an, like uncompromising. I'm going to be like, no matter what, I'm going to go for it. Did you have a moment like that for yourself early on and then have never looked back?
I think I couldn't go back to one specific moment, but I think that's just kind of been my mindset even since like I said, since I've been little, is, when I'm on the field, I kind of only know one speed to go. And that's just going to be going full speed, max effort. I think my dad always instilled in me, he's like, the one thing that people shouldn't be able to bash is your effort when you're on the field. And so that's something too that, when, like you said, first couple of weeks of fall camp, I may be feeling, uneasy about things. But the one thing I was going to do is make sure that I wasn't the reason things didn't work out. I was going to, give every shot I had. So in terms of, being able to think that this is something I could do, I think it was always something that I had faith in myself and the people around me. And I think, that's what's gotten me to where I'm at.
So let's talk about where you're at. I called 3 of your games this season. They were 3 in a row in advance of the last one against Iowa. You got Washington on Friday night in a huge Big Ten game that's like an old school Pac-12 game. So we all love that here on the West Coast. You've been on this tear, man. Double-digit tackles. I mean, you're up for a bunch of national awards. What has it been like to be you when you're playing? Like, take me through what it's like to 10, 11, 12 tackles in any given game.
Yeah, I think, like you said, it's definitely been a change from the last 2 years when I was playing. But for me, it's really just I've just been having a lot of fun when I'm on the field. The years when you're getting playing time here or there, it's it's fun. But this is really what football's about, is being in there, being able to fly around and things like that. And I think too, it's part of the whole defense where. We were talking about the other day with a couple of the guys. It's, one person, Kane gets a strip and you see the whole defense with him, or, Femi's 2 TFLs in the backfield, and the whole defense is up there. We're all celebrating together. So really being out there this year is just a whole lot of fun. And I think the plays and that we all make almost just feed off of each other and allow each other to keep making plays.
You guys had this hellacious stretch that I believe was as challenging as anybody in America. I know you guys aren't about excuses and you just go into the next game, but you got through that, and now you've had all this success under first-year head coach DeShaun Foster. How were you able to stay, as you guys would say, enthusiastic every single day amid road game in Baton Rouge, road game at Penn State, game against Oregon at home, like just a challenging stretch that would test any team in the country?
Mm-hmm. I think amid all those, obviously you don't want to come out with losses and stuff, but you could see on the tape there were things where we're like, we're close. It's not like, we're coming out and just, laying an egg. There's just small things we got to fix, and we could be the team that we really thought we were going to be, and I think those paired with just, we have a lot of people who are doing it for each other versus themselves on the team and the coaching staff. It's one whole unit and team versus each person trying to do it individually. And when you have those together and see it being able to be so close to what you want to get to, and obviously even with wins, there's things where we're even closer to just being able to dominate some of these games. And so I think it's a combo of those and the type of culture and character we have on the team too that has really, been able to take what some could see as things that weren't good, and we're able to form them, learn from them, and turn them into what we've been able to.
Akaika Malloy is your defensive coordinator. He's a guy that you've known since you showed up on campus. He's a guy that played at Washington, your opponent this weekend. I've known him for about 20 years, and his energy is clearly infectious and something that jumps off the practice field or just when you meet him and he gives you a hug and a high five. What is it like to play for a guy like that, and how has he made sure that your side of the ball has just continued to evolve positively as the season has progressed?
Yeah, I think playing for him is one of the greatest coaches you could probably play for in terms of a defensive coordinator. If you were watching the Iowa UCLA game, you see anytime we had a turnover, all the players are jumping around and stuff, and all of a sudden you see him flying in, jumping around with us. So you have that aspect of the energy and enthusiasm that he's always going to bring, and then there's also a level of focus throughout the week too, where he's able to balance both having the focus and the discipline on getting what we need to do done, but still also having that enthusiasm with it. And then on top of that, I think just outside of football, he's somebody who cares about you individually. Each person that he's coaching on the team, he has a deep love and care for. And that's something that as well builds onto the field. It's somebody you want to go out there and make plays for and have that scheme which, by the way, the schemes are amazing that we were putting up each week, but have those schemes, you want to go out and play and make what we have work.
Yeah, you're one of my favorite defenses to study every single week. You also have one of my favorite SIDs in Andrew Sinatra. He told me a story that after the Penn State game, you're flying home and you're doing homework on the flight. You're engineering major, right?
Yeah.
What is that about? How do you navigate that? When do you sleep? How are you doing academically right now?
Academics, obviously during season, there's always some things you're going to have to sacrifice. So maybe a little bit less free time in the season and things like that. But I tend to think it's not too difficult in terms of a lot of people have, other things going on too. So for me, it's just a little bit more on the academic side and things like that. A couple more midterms than most people, but yeah, just kind of figuring out, the free time to get things done. It's just being a little bit more prepared throughout the week with knowing when I have time to do things, but it's not too bad.
Yeah, you could handle it. You can do anything, man. Captain America, right? To that point, a couple more before we cut you loose here. When you got put on scholarship in the fall of 2022, what was the first phone call that you made, and do you recall who it was with and the context of it?
Oh yeah, the first call was to my parents. I think it was. I don't remember if it was to my dad or my mom. It might have been to my dad, but then he didn't answer, so then it was to my mom. But it was both of them. They weren't together at the time, so it was separate. I remember calling my dad because he was at my little brother's practice. So I told him, and then when I called my mom, she was with my younger sister and my older brothers. So both of those were pretty cool calls to have. Pretty surreal at the time.
What'd you say? And what did they say?
I'm normally a little bit awkward when things are kind of a little bit serious. So I was more just I kind of just said it bluntly. Yeah, they just put me on scholarship, kind of just like that. And then they start getting they start freaking out a little, and then I get more uncomfortable. So, but it was pretty cool to hear their happiness.
I've always felt that it's much more challenging to earn a scholarship in college than it is to earn one in high school. I'm wondering if you agree with that and can put some context behind it and maybe inspire some walk-ons currently right now that are looking at college and saying, oh, this path looks pretty steep.
Yeah. In terms of the difference, I didn't earn one in high school, so, it might have been a little bit harder there for me, but obviously I think there's challenges with both. But in terms of just earning one in college, I think there's a lot of times where it really just comes down to coming in and being the same guy every day and continuing. There's going to be times when it feels like, you're the work that you're doing isn't being seen. And those are the times when you have to keep going, because that's when the work counts, is when nobody's watching. And that's when eventually the dividends will pay out later on down the road.
Yeah, I've always defined that as the lonely work, which is doing things that are boring, just longer. Not longer than anybody else, but just having to do things longer. And I think about you. You were a 0-star recruit, and I support that. I was as well. And now you're the semifinalist for the Butkus Award, also for the Burlsworth Trophy, which is the best player who started their career as a walk-on. But when you hear that, I know you got a lot going on. You got a game, you have school, you have a life. But have you taken a moment to be like, that's a pretty gnarly starting point and now reality of today for you?
Yeah, I think in terms of awards and things like that, I don't honestly pay too much attention to them. I know sometimes some of my teammates will make fun of me because I'm not too big on social media and stuff. So things like that, I don't often see some of the things. But like you said, right now it's kind of busy with still school and preparing for the next week and stuff. So I haven't really put too much thought to those things. Definitely, they're definitely honors and stuff like that. And I think a lot of it goes to show for the rest of the defense too. It kind of. I'm not a big fan of when we single out one guy because we're all working together, and a lot of times I'm just reaping the benefits of everybody else being able to do a lot of the unseen work. But yeah.
All right, well said, man. Your head coach, first-time head coach at his alma mater. I'm curious, for somebody who's known Coach Foster, right? You weren't against his running backs when he was coaching the running backs and the scout team. He's told me many times the story of he would ask you, hey, how are backs doing? How are they hitting the holes? And now you're seeing him lead this team. I'm curious if you could put some thought, some context behind the relationship you two have and what you've noticed from him as a leader of this storied program this season.
Yeah, I think in terms of the relationship we have, for me, it was pretty cool to see come full circle because, like you said, I started just going against his backs and stuff on scout team. And he was one of the coaches that as a walk-on would come and tell me, you're going to end up being something here. And so being able to have that confidence from him early on and things like that, and then watching it come full circle now to where he honestly pushed me into the more play time this year, and seeing how that come about has been pretty great. And then just in terms of as a coach, it's similar to Malloy, where it's somebody you want to go out and play for. You can feel the passion he has for the game and has for us. And those three pillars really are what the program is and what he teaches. He doesn't just tell us to do it. He has those three pillars in his own life as well. So it's something where it's very easy to come and want to play for him.
Well said. Discipline, respect, and enthusiasm. So before we let you go, there's a beautiful article about you in the LA Times, and your teammates call you a heat-seeking missile, Captain America, and as you know, Sunshine from the old film Remember the Titans. If you were to pick one, like which one are you saying, okay, you can call me that?
In terms of nicknames, a lot of my nicknames that I get called just are modifications of my last name because it's so long. So, I'll hear Swiss, anything that somewhat sounds similar, somebody's referring to me. But my favorite in terms of those is probably not my favorite. I think it's just Dev Apu calls me Sunshine. He started it freshman year, and, every once in a while somebody else will do it, but that's just kind of every morning when he sees me, I get a nice, hey, Sunshine. So, I don't know how great of a comparison that one is. I guess I got the blonde hair to go with it. But yeah.
I love it, man. You're nailing the prototype SoCal surfer, but badass linebacker as well, man. It's been so fun to watch you. You have inspired many, including many in my family. Our youth football team loves watching you. They all came to a game earlier this season. You are their favorite player, and I'm stealing what your dad taught you, which was, hey, nobody can take away your effort. So that will be the theme tonight in practice in the flag team here in Venice Beach, man. So thank you for that. But also, more importantly, thank you for the time, your story, and best of luck this weekend against Washington and the rest of the week. For all those voters, this is that dude. Keep an eye on this man for UCLA. Carson Schwesinger. Thanks, man, for the time. Appreciate you coming on.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
It's the Afterglow. Jim Thornby, I'm Yogi Roth. That was Carson Schwesinger, presented, of course, by our founding partner, 76, keeping you in the know on the go, go, go. Jim, I'm always inspired by a former walk-on because I was one. I've lived that path. You know that story too many times. But for you, what were your big takeaways from our conversation?
Well, I mean, obviously we've talked about, the Butkus and the Burlsworth and all those. You look at his bio on the UCLA website, a lot of academic acknowledgments, and no surprise in listening to him talk here. Now, I do have my my All-American emails in my inbox right now. So once we're done with this interview and moving on to the back half of the week, I'm going to start do some deep diving. But he's definitely going to be in my conversation for those All-American votes.
Yeah, I think there's something to this conference realignment because there's so many teams that it's hard to be like, that's the best linebacker in the league, right? Like back a year ago, it'd be like, yeah, Carson Schwesinger, best linebacker in the Pac-12 because it's 12 teams and versus 14 teams or whatever would be in the Big Ten. And I think now with so many teams, like such a conversation on the top 12 and the CFP that like you lose a little bit of that luster. I hope voters don't do that with Carson Schwesinger because it is the story that every fan of college football is yearning for. It's the guy who's done it in, call it a formerly traditional way, right? Whether it's staying at the school at the same time, whether it's betting on himself, whether it's playing scout team and not complaining and hitting the portal, but just doubling down. It's a guy who's going to be an engineer graduate, a guy who's thriving academically, a guy who stayed home in Southern California. Like a lot of things that I think got all of us, at least for you and I, to fall in love with college football, and probably the majority of voters, Carson Schwesinger is exhibits. So I hope they just recognize that. And then I think on the field, God, what he's been able to do, and Akaika Malloy positioning him every game with the defensive tackles, defensive linemen taking up so many blockers, and you just watch his run through, the playmaking ability, the physicality. It's a clinic for linebackers. I think my biggest takeaway was his dad, right? His dad reminding him that people can label you, can say what they want about you, but nobody can ever take away your effort. And I love that because his effort is dramatically noticeable. I stole that. I used it for our flag team in our practice. We used it in our final game on Sunday. And big love to Carson in that regard. Big thanks, of course, to Andrew Sinatra and everybody at UCLA for making that interview possible. And again, to all of you, this community is awesome. Here we are in week 12, college football through the lens of the West Coast. Nobody's going to give it to you with more thoughtfulness than we will. And yes, this last couple weeks, maybe we'll even ramp up a little bit pending the CFP. All right, everybody, stay safe. I'm off to Chicago. Jim, meditate before the game Friday with Arizona, and we will be texting nonstop all Saturday long. Peace.